Today we're looking at the prophet Isaiah and chapter 9. So, here's some verses from the prophet Isaiah. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has a light shone. You have multiplied the nations, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the trampling warrior in battle, tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. Well, there's the introduction. This is a chapter, not the bit that we've just read, but it's a chapter that contains a section that might suddenly seem familiar, and it's often used in churches. It's read out at Christmas. So this is the beginning of a trio of Bible studies we're putting on, a trio of Christmas passages. And this is a prophecy that Isaiah wrote down hundreds of years before Jesus' birth, but about Jesus. And hopefully that'll become clear as we read through. Maybe I'll just start by laying out some of the context of the chapter. So maybe it's useful to give a quick review of what's happened right before in chapter 8. The Lord speaks to Isaiah and tells him that because his people have rejected him, the king of Assyria is coming. You might remember last week that I mentioned Sargon of Akkad had taken over the region of Samaria. Well, sadly, I have to issue a correction because I got confused. So I think this is the correct sequence. So Sargon of Akkad did indeed invade the region that would later become known as Samaria. But that was earlier in history. The actual threat to the nation of Israel was not the Akkadians, but the Assyrians. And when the Assyrians conquered Samaria, they were led by a different leader. But the different leader was also called Sargon, and that's why I got confused. In fact, he was called Sargon II, and he was named after Sargon of Akkad. Okay, so there you go. Correction from last week, and relevant to this passage. So in Isaiah chapter 8, the chapter before what we're looking at today, the Lord says he's going to bring the Assyrians in as a form of judgment on Israel. So Isaiah is delivering this message from the Lord. You guys have turned away, and I'm going to judge you. I'm going to bring in this devastating attack from the Assyrians, and specifically from this guy Sargon II. It's interesting in chapter 8. I just wanted, in passing, to mention a line, just as an aside. It says, "Do not call conspiracy what this people call a conspiracy." So there you go. If we ever do that chapter, maybe we can have a discussion about what that means. But in this chapter, the mood suddenly changes, and there's talk of light dawning. So with me on the stream today is the 21st reaction. Good evening, good afternoon. How's things with you?
Things are going well. The weather's good where I'm at.
Great.
I just have a small channel that's mostly about traditionalists and reactionary politics, and that's my thing. I'm actually a Catholic Catacumen, so it's nice to have a Bible study here, and I'll be reading, chewing through it, asking questions about it. Obviously, none of my opinions are perfectly valid in this regard because I'm a catechumen, but it's good to have someone bounce off some ideas.
Yeah, could you explain what is a catechumen?
So a catechumen is someone that's going through the rite of initiation into the Catholic Church. It's not someone that's been baptized or confirmed, but they're on the path into entering it. So usually that takes about a year.
Fantastic. We welcome all manner of people onto these Bible study streams and as viewers. I'd love to have, a whole range through from avowed atheists coming in to check out what these Christians are talking about, through to like PhD level, Bible, New Testament studies experts. I don't know. I myself am not trained in any formal way. I just, have done a bit of personal Bible study. Yeah, so any thoughts on this passage so far? Any questions? Or should we get into the meat of it, which is about to happen?
Well, I imagine it's the typical story of. I mean, the passage as a whole reminds me of the basic idea in the Old Testament that the Israelites, God's people, are blessed. Then they take advantage and they go towards other idols, and then they become fallen, and then He separates himself from them in order to bring them back. And so, Isaiah is one of the important prophets in order to do that, in order for the light to show again, as it's mentioned in this verse.
Yeah, Isaiah is definitely one of the major prophets. He's called a major prophet partly just because of the quantity of his prophecy that we have. I guess in the Bible we divide them into those two sections, don't we? The major prophets and the minor prophets, which is purely down to how big the books are. But reading through Isaiah is incredible. If I encourage anybody listening who hasn't done it, read through the whole thing. It's like hit after hit of intriguing, incredible stuff. And there's definitely themes that come through. And I think two of the key themes are judgment and hope. And at Christmas time, it's nice to pick a passage which dips a bit into the hope. So as you can see in verse 2 here, the people who were walking in darkness. Let me bring it up. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them a light shone. So should we carry on and find out a bit more about what is this light?
Oh, yes, please.
Great. See if everybody recognizes this verse. Verse 6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So we've got here a clear prophecy of a messianic figure, like a savior. But more than that, in Jewish teaching, God was clearly one, and there was no idea of God becoming man, right? We're often told this must be a Christian invention. The Jews weren't expecting God made man. Yet here we clearly see we have a baby who's being called Mighty God, Everlasting Father. So very interesting verse, this. It's clear why the Christians always bring it up. Any thoughts on this verse?
Well, it's part of the thing of how the fedora wearing atheists are like, there's no mention of Christ coming in the Old Testament. There's no predictions of that
Yeah.
or prophecies of that. No, there's no evidence. And so yeah, it's fun to have some of these specific things. I mean, yeah, clearly calling a human flesh, born in the flesh person, being born and coming into the world as God, that kind of cuts it down a bit more clearly than one might suspect earlier. So I just find that funny.
Well, quite. It's almost as if a lot of these atheists haven't actually read the whole Old Testament before they start making pronouncements about it. So another thing on this verse, the prophecy is about somebody to be born who will save the nation. And it seems clear what this person will be like, right? They're going to be a political figure who everyone's going to love and adore. But this doesn't sound like Jesus at all. Like, Jesus never took the government on his shoulders. And in fact, the religious authorities at the time said that he was blaspheming and then wanted to put him to death. So what do you think about that? How does this verse square with what if we think this really is about Jesus? What does it mean, this idea of a government on his shoulders and everyone calling him the Prince of Peace?
Right. Well, I do like the prep for my answer and everything, but no, I mean, yeah,
Sorry.
we imagine. No, I love it actually. We imagine, oh well, give unto Caesar what is his. Oh, all this stuff. He's supposed to be this political pacifist and all that,
Yeah,
but people usually confuse it, get it past the point when he's saying you will be part of my kingdom in heaven. So he's preparing this kind of political organization, but it's not one that people can explicitly see on earth.
exactly. So I think we should carry on to verse 7, and we'll continue this train of thought. So the next verse.
And
Go
Cringewalker
on.
can come on if you'd like.
Yes, indeed. Add to stream.
Hello.
Hello. Anna Quinn,
Sorry,
Knight,
sorry for
Cringe
being,
Walker.
sorry for the lateness.
No problem at all.
I have no
Um,
excuse. I simply didn't see the time.
Absolutely fine. Do you tell you what? Let's rewind back to verse 6, which is such a classic, such a charming verse, such an important verse. Would you like to take any time to comment on this, or should we roll on?
Well, I remember. I think I might have been the kid way back in grammar school who had to read this verse for a Christmas play.
Let's hear it.
or-
I think we should get the Cringe Walker rendition.
What? I was a wee one. I don't remember. I was like, for
I would be
Yeah,
part
high
of
levels.
Handel's Messiah. I was part of Handel's Messiah, and this was my favorite movement when they would sing the first phrase,
Yeah.
of course.
yeah. Well, for me, I was literally remembering it differently than what's here because like we would always say a little bit older English in Catholic
yes.
school. For it was like
King
for unto
James.
us a child is born, based on the
Mhm.
song. So for unto us a child is born. I forgot how the song went, but to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. I remember some of these things were. I vaguely remember some of these things had a deeper meaning in different languages. Like
Right.
these were like a mix of different like titles emperors had in the region.
There you go. There's the King James version, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting because like these are like titles. Not these titles aren't limited to any one group of people. They're like kind of human titles that God has acquiesced for his son. I know
Mhm.
Prince of Peace was what they would call the Persian king. I think. Well, he was Shah of Shahs, but the mighty God obviously is God himself. The everlasting
Right.
Father is everlasting Father is a interesting. I've always found it interesting that it was everlasting Father because we're talking about the Son. That's one that stuck out to me a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this is something we were just briefly talking about before you jumped in. There's often a narrative sort of spun, I would say, that the Jewish conception of God is quite straightforward, that there is this singular God who created everything. And then in the New Testament, it all gets much more complicated because you've got this idea of a son of God who is himself divine and is God, and the Trinity is all confusing. But I think we see here in this verse clearly the complexity of God is visible all the way through the Bible, including you go all the way back to Genesis 1, the creation of the world has the verbs are all in the plural form, so singular God, plural created. And again, as you say, everlasting Father is the name being given to the child. Mighty God is the name given to the child. So how is it that divinity is contained in human form? I think a mystery that to some extent still nobody fully understands.
And they make sure to say son here. I think that's interesting, because obviously the language of him, the son, called from the Father, is very frequent in the New Testament, but they make sure to parse it out here.
Absolutely. Yeah, and maybe it's just worth touching on some of these properties as well. Wonderful counselor. That there's no way God's looking to us for input. He's the one who's going to be giving us counsel. Mighty God, like the strength isn't. It's not that the nation is strong and the person in charge is strong by the fact that the nation is strong, which is often the case. In this case, the might comes from this child who's been born. Yeah, an everlasting Father. We see lots of people, born throughout humanity's history who are fathers. There's only one being who is an everlasting Father. I think it's very clear. And Prince of Peace, although we're going to get onto some judgy stuff in a bit, it's not in the character of God to make pointless war.
Yeah. That's something a lot like people, like atheists, will often like be angry at God for being like a warrior at times in the Old Testament, but like where's the wrong? when did he go to war against innocent people? It was always like these like there's something actually, I'd like to bring up one thing that is lesser known, but are you aware that Israel's laws on slavery are actually inversions of the Babylonian law code?
Huh.
So like if you look at like the slave code in the Old Testament, people are always like, oh, why is the Bible legislating slavery? That makes it pro-slavery. But if you actually look at Israel's neighbors, they're actually plagiarizing Babylon's slave code and then inverting it. So like Babylon, if a man is found with a runaway slave, kill the man and take the slave. Israel's is hide the slave and protect the hider. Like it's many times it directly quotes the Babylonian slave code and then inverts it. And I have no idea about like historically like what was exactly the pre-exile relationship between Babylon and actually correction, I might be confusing Babylon and Assyria in this case, but they had very like regional slave codes. But it is a fun little exercise to do if you ever have the time to compare the legal system of Israel's neighbors to Israel, and you'll see it's not that it's pro-slavery, it's that it's literally plagiarizing its neighbors and inverting the rule set. And this is something to bear in mind with like different like things. The Bible tends to, yes, it does tend to reflect a lot of its local traditions. Like, there's a lot of slave stories, not slave, there's a lot of flood stories in the region. There's a lot of messianic stories in the region. But what the Bible often does is invert it in something that points to a deeper truth and a deeper comfort. It's often overlooked because people are like, oh, look, it's plagiarizing. It's not original, as if that means it's wrong. When in reality, if you,
be a really interesting exercise if we ever get to do like a Leviticus or a Deuteronomy passage and to do a direct comparison of where can these laws be found in other contemporary societies. Like I've often heard it said, an eye for an eye. Well, people today think that that's a horrible barbaric idea, that if you take someone's eye out, that the right response is to take your eye out.
Yeah, well, people today want to extinguish their own young, so who cares what they think?
Exactly. Like, don't bother me when you're killing your own next generation. Like, your civilization literally won't be around long enough for me to give a crap about.
But my understanding was that the eye for an eye was actually, in a lot of ways, a limiting law. It was don't exceed the harm that was done when you're being retributive, and not to mention that it was, rather than individual retribution, it was controlling it, making it something that's not personal. Hence why Jesus then says, turn the other cheek, rather than if somebody slaps you, slap them right back. And certainly not slap them twice as hard. Anyway, let's look at the next verse. Of the increase of his government and of peace, there will be no end on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Charles is saying my voice is really quiet. Does someone else want to talk? And I'll see if I can fiddle with my volume controls.
Um, all right. Well, as we were reading, of the increase of his government and the peace there will be no end, and on the throne of David and over his kingdom to establish it and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Yeah, so it is something to meditate on. Like, up until Jesus Christ, it was things happening now and in the future. Well, not future, things happening now and then reference to the past. And then after Jesus, it's like things happening now and the future. So, and many times for the Christian, the birth of Jesus is the center point of history, and everything else is pointing to it, either backwards or forwards.
Can I just test? Is my voice at a good volume now? Charles, let me know.
Sounds a bit lower, actually.
Is it quieter than ever? Oh, no. Could somebody talk about who is this guy David? He talks about the throne of David.
David is the king of Israel. Yeah, I forgot the name of it.
One more try. Am I a little bit louder?
Whoa!
Too loud?
Voice of God.
This is
Silence, Charles. I'm loud enough now.
It's all about that based Bible studies.
It's a bass Bible study. We don't use any treble frequencies at all. Yeah, so sorry, was somebody saying about King David?
No, you have to lower your voice. It's too loud.
Is it too loud? What if I just move the mic away? Never happy, all right.
Move it about a foot more away.
All right, how about this? Have I
That's
found a happy medium?
That's a bit better.
All right, next time I will figure out my audio settings before the stream starts. It's probably a better idea. Anyway, yeah, so we see that he's going to take over the king of David, who was the first great king of Israel, and I guess it's easy to see from this why the disciples were expecting Jesus to overthrow the Roman Empire. Right? That's not a giant leap when you say, okay, the person we're expecting is going to rule on the throne of David. And 21st Reaction kind of hinted at the solution to this conundrum, I think. So they think we're waiting for a kingdom on earth, but Jesus started talking about the coming kingdom of God, which meant something slightly unexpected. Does anyone want to kind of take over what I'm talking about? Or maybe you don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, oh yeah, they were waiting because their experience was the Maccabees, of course, and the Maccabees were a warrior rebellion that was fairly successful before being shot down. So they were expecting next round of Maccabees that would save them. They also did not expect it to be God because in the Old Testament you see Messiah used as the king of different countries. Cyrus, I think, is called a Messiah. So they had no idea that it would be someone who would save them actually, like spiritually rather than physically.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Spiritual salvation rather than physical. We have in the Old Covenant very much a nation on earth which has been given a special place, a special literal place, part of the map, and special commands. What we see of this coming king that's being prophesied here by Isaiah is a new type of kingdom. I mean, if you think about what kingdom means, it's the domain over which the king has authority. And in the case of the throne of David, he was talking about the region of Israel on the map. The coming nation over which Jesus will have command is the people. It's over the hearts. If you're a Christian, you've said Jesus is king. My heart is part of his kingdom. My life, it doesn't matter where I am in the world. I could be technically under somebody else's kingdom. Here I am in the UK. Mm-hmm. Am I under Boris Johnson's authority? Ultimately, there's nothing he can do to take me out of Jesus's kingdom. And it is a kingdom which will last forever and will be upheld with righteousness and zeal. So that's my interpretation of this passage. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, and I can see that another example of the prophecy being fulfilled just in a way that wasn't fully expected by regular people. And of course, the key part of this is of the increase of his government. So his spiritual domain was started with this tiny nucleus of disciples in the Levant, and then it slowly spreads and all over the Roman Empire, and then obviously the European continent, and then farther out to the European colonies. So it did continually spread in that kind of large historical way, and it kind of fulfills that prophecy.
Brilliant. Should we carry on? Let's read some more. Okay, we've had some nice happy light bits. I feel we may be dipping back into judgment here. So brace. The Lord has sent a word against Jacob, and it will fall on Israel. And all the people will know Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, who say in pride and in arrogance of heart, the bricks have fallen. But we will build with dressed stones. The sycamores have been cut down, but we will put cedars in their place. But the Lord raises up the adversities of Rezin against him. Let's see, how far am I going to go? Go to verse 16. The Lord raises the adversities of Rezin against him and stirs up his enemies. The Syrians on the east and the Philistines on the west devour Israel with open mouth. For all this, his anger has not turned away, and his hand is still outstretched. The people did not turn to him who struck them, nor inquire of the Lord of hosts. So the Lord cut off from Israel head and tail, palm branch and reed in one day. The elder and honored man is the head, and the prophet who teaches lies in the tail. For those who guide this people have been leading them astray, and those who are guided by them are swallowed up. It's kind of remarkable, isn't it, that the scriptures of the nation of Israel are actually so filled with anti-Israeli sentiment. There's a certain amount which can be read as, yeah, Israel's great and the other nations are our enemies are evil. But there's just a colossal quantity saying Israel is unfaithful and evil and God's going to destroy us. Puts me kind of in mind of that quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He says the line, I'll tell you what, I could probably get it up. Give me a second. Yeah, the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart, and through all human hearts. This line shifts. Inside us it oscillates with the years, and even within hearts, overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained. It's kind of a uniquely...
And that's from the...
Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah, that's right. I listened to it through the audiobook, and once I reached that part, I just stopped listening because I feel like I got the message that I wanted.
It's a hard listen, right? It's pretty full on. I mean,
it's also just the same. It's like beating you on the head over and over with the same thing. So it's kind of.
But Solzhenitsyn, of course, had a strong Christian faith, and it was often remarked upon that the people who were bearing up best against the Soviets' terrible atrocities, the work camps and the gulags, were Christians who seemed to have a higher calling, a different perspective on life. That's kind of a side point, not really related to Isaiah. But the reason I bring up this quote is it's this perspective you get from the Bible, which is not saying Ray, we are God's people and we're all good, but it's actually saying God is good, we're bad, and even though we're God's people, He's going to judge us if we don't do good, and His standard is actually for all of humanity. I think it is historically a uniquely Christian perspective, something that is in our culture maybe viewed as universal, but that's because we have this Christian heritage that's disappearing, I would say, and we see an increase in identity politics as we drift away from the attitude that's rooted in God's morality.
Right.
God's people were given this position of privilege. In a way, God does believe in privilege. Things won't be fair in the world. But God's expectations of Israel was they're going to bless the rest of the world, which they didn't really do.
No.
So the sin,
it was a failure, and their failure became like the reason why we were grafted in.
Right. So I mean, it turned out to our benefit. But the sin's not being privileged, right? The sin is turning away from God's law, and it inevitably results in God's judgment. No matter how powerful we feel, right? We think we can control the climate. We think we can control disease. We think we can control the press. Yeah. But we're not more powerful than God.
Yeah, one thing I've been like, for example, like God will also actively make sure of that, such as with the Tower of Babylon. You might remember. Like they thought they could rule the world and get to heaven, but God was like, "Well, here's a bunch of new languages for you to figure out." Then, I don't know if have you ever seen the Gru meme with the Bible?
No.
Oh no.
What's that?
Oh, it's off topic, but if I find it, I'll post it. But
stick it in chat.
Yeah, once I find it. Oh, I found it. Okay. Oh, it's in French. Oh no.
That's the good.
I can translate, I guess. But like on that topic.
Hang on. I've got a Gru meme that might be the one you're referring to. Let's see if I can bring that up. Open image in new tab. There we go. Right, I'll share this instead. Is this the one that you mean? Hang on.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
great.
So like it's something I've told, because obviously with this recent politics, people have been like going all nuts about like, oh, some crazy globalist going to take over, and I've had an oftentimes response of like, yeah, but when did God's promise to prevent our unification cease? Like, did he ever withdraw that promise? So like if his promises are true, then he's going to take down the Tower of Babylon one way or another, no matter how many forms it tries to get built in. I think there was an attempt to do that with the European Union a few years ago, and has clearly failed due to many reasons. So I on the other hand, am more excited what happens in the next few years to see what kind of scale of tectonic collapse I'm going to witness when God comes to bring down his tower, bring down Babylon again.
I hope it's because they get groiped. That would be nice.
If a lot of people are like attached to their heroes, like certain orange men who I won't utter, at least the censors of YouTube here. They get attached to their heroes depending on where they go, and like they rise and fall with the man, and this is the dangerous thing, I think. Don't get me wrong, it's been a blast of 4 years, but all good things must come to an end. I instead view this as, okay, so now that is over, what's going to be the next thing? What happens next with the tower? Like, it's clearly there's now been an attempt to build a new Tower of Babylon with this whole Build Back Better initiative, which inherently recalls back to build. It's you can almost say yes, build the tower back better, right?
Oh my gosh!
I never
thought of it that way.
Yeah.
These things are, when you learn the rhyme of history, it becomes a fun song to go to. It also provides. There is a great amount of of comfort in that, though, especially in this Christmas season with everything happening. It's like, well, no matter how better, bigger you build that tower, God's still gonna rip it down for His throne to come from Christ eventually. Sorry for my little rambling mess there.
You're totally right, though. I mean, it's kind of encouraging that it ultimately. I mean, I often think the ultimate white pill is Jesus. Yeah, we don't really know what's going to happen in human history, but we have a pretty good idea. Lots of bad stuff. So it's not comforting in terms of, oh, everything's going to be okay politically, our country's not going to fall apart. All of those things could happen. But we do know that one day we'll look back on all these things, and like Paul says in Romans 8, the suffering that we might endure now, it's not even going to be worth comparing to the glory that will be revealed in us. Yeah. So it's a perspective shift on the obsession over human politics, and it's to say, don't long for hope in something man-made at all. It's inevitable that our nations are finite, but our God is forever.
Yep.
Cool. Should we carry on?
Yeah, where were we? I got lost.
Sorry.
Rambling. Let's carry on from verse 17, and we'll probably get to the end in this section. So 17 to the end of the chapter. Therefore, the Lord does not rejoice over their young men, and has no compassion on their fatherless and widows. For everyone is godless and an evildoer, and every mouth speaks folly. For all this his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. For wickedness burns like a fire, it consumes briars and thorns, it kindles the thickets of the forest, and they roll upward in a column of smoke. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts, the land is scorched, and the people are like fuel for the fire. No one spares another. They slice meat on the right, but are still hungry, and they devour on the left, but are not satisfied. Each devours the flesh of his own arm. Manasseh devours Ephraim, and Ephraim devours Manasseh. Together they are against Judah. For all this his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. Oh, there we go. I didn't even realize at the end of this very chapter is a pretty similar sentiment about, the grass withers and the flower fades. Is it Ecclesiastes, that same imagery about grass and flowers is used to describe the lives of humans. That's it's definitely a very alien perspective these days, but I think a very helpful one.
Oh yeah, I mean you could see the fire burning everything up, especially in California. But but if you go back to, I think it was 17, the first one, it just reminded me. Of course, like all the young people now are there's no delight to be taken in them. Unfortunately, it's very tragic. And when they say every mouth speaks folly or nonsense or madness, reminds me one of my cousins is an awful, which means affluent, white female liberal, and on her fridge she has a fridge magnet that says pro male pregnancy. So it's this just kind of nonsense, this kind of folly, and but you know what those people. So that verse is true, but it's true with the other verse. They slice to the right and they devour to the left, but they'll still always have this hunger in them and this discontentment, and that's really what it is, and that's why it burns up everything.
Yeah, like it is to some degree a great release and relief, because in reality, you really don't have anything to worry about. You get to like watch as a Christian as the world kind of like chops itself up. I mean, think if you were like St. Augustine or something at the end of the Roman era, witnessing this mess, and yet he's still able to write all of those very calming, very meditative phrases through it all. And he even ends up getting killed by some German from far away who invades Carthage. Think for a moment, someone like St. Augustine, what he's thinking. He's writing from Carthage, watching the Roman world burn, and in North Africa dies at the hands of a German soldier. in any other generation, would he expect to find a German in North Africa? It was complete lunacy, and he was able to write all of his meditations that like create such a peace for his time. I think we're in very similar times, and we have to just rest on the word, knowing it's going to outlast everything else. Don't be surprised if one day you look up and find yourself being beaten by some random Chinese soldier in New York or something. Rest assured, everything crazy can happen, but the word.
That's you, Cringe Walker.
Yes, I'm imagining my own future. But rest assured, no matter what, the word will endure. And you got to see front row seat the lunacy of the world, but you still get to rest every day on the word.
I mean, George Carlin was right about one thing. The world's a big stage, and in America, you get a front row seat. So you just get to you get to write down everything you see, get some popcorn,
Yeah. It can
So
be scary,
something-
but yeah. Go on.
Something I'd like to discuss from this little passage is the attitude to judgment and punishment. Why does God punish in this passage? In fact, I can probably find some good verses to demonstrate what I mean here. So, this verse. For his anger has not turned away. And similarly, 2 verses later in verse 19, though the wrath of the Lord of hosts, through the wrath of the Lord of hosts, the land is scorched. The people are like fuel for the fire, no one spares another. So it's God is angry. It's what's caused it. Probably not the first answer that would come to mind, but this is our God who we worship, and this is his attitude. How should we feel when people blaspheme against God?
Oh, it's whatever, it's just, turn the other cheek, judge not, it's fine.
No.
People are going to do their thing.
Righteous anger is clearly the correct response. How should we feel when our nation celebrates the murder of children so that they can kind of, continue their orgiastic lifestyle? Righteous anger.
I saw the candidate for Georgia right now say he's a pro-choice pastor, and I'm like, oh, so Satanist. And it's just like you can't just pause and look at that. Like, well, what am I supposed to say to that? They're so ridiculous that they would, these are the kind of people who would tell Mary, hey, why not abort Jesus? And they would feel that they're justified in this. That's how lunatic they are. That is the degree of lunacy. I've been having a great fun just saying little like kind of, I guess you could say like shit posting in real life. I've said little things that offend the pro-choice quote unquote Christians, like oh, isn't it nice that there's an ark of flesh for the word made flesh? Just a little thing like that. Which like just it's funny how they can't really respond to it, because if they say anything, they know they're insulting God, but they're still feeling angry that they can't say anything. It's funny to watch them like try to work out the contradiction, and they'll just run away from it. They'll just ignore it. You can say stuff like you remember how like John the Baptist and Jesus celebrated in the womb? They had like a little party when they met each other. When Mary met Elizabeth, it was like, so I'll ask little questions. Oh, do you think God was still you think the second person of the Trinity was still a person as a fetus? Just like little questions like that. Like, I like to use the power of rhyme and riddle to get people to like expose their hypocritical beliefs, and how like there is an innate contradiction in what they're trying to create in this being pro-choice and Christian. No, you can't, because by definition you are denying God's personhood in the womb, and God didn't stop being a person, so you have denied God.
I saw a Babylon Bee article, I think it was earlier today, that said unborn babies disguising themselves as incarcerated prisoners, so they will be defended.
Yeah, and you'll continue to see more lunacy like this as that worldview meets more and more contradictions, because inherently that worldview is non-conforming to reality, and so it constantly hits walls in reality that God has put there, and just continually makes new contradictions to try and fit itself. But the thing about contradictions is that you can make contradictions, but every time you do, people who aren't you are going to lose legitimacy in your worldview. Like, it's very easy for the indoctrinated to create new contradictions because they're indoctrinated, but everyone else is just going to be like, what is this? And you saw some bits of that this year with, a significant number of the Hispanic population becoming more Republican instead of Democrat because they were just not vibing with where this was going. You also start to see that with some of the Asian minorities with, like, hey, we're getting screwed over because we don't get to go to college now. There are little things that happen, little cracks that start to form every time you make a new contradiction. And I think you've seen a revving up of contradictions now that it's going to start, the tower is already starting to crumble a little.
Yeah. And sorry, we were somewhere with Lambda. I'm trying to remember where it was.
I can't remember.
My tangents.
I do want to say that
It was based, though.
we should warn people to change their ways and pray for them to be regenerated. Like, there is a right humanity to having compassion for people who have different views than us. So I don't want to come across that we take delight in the judgment prematurely, but if people set themselves up against the righteous moral law of the universe, we should want them ultimately to face up to the judge of all. So it's a case of becoming more Christ-like, I guess, as we mature and we find our attitude hits that, hits the correct point between wanting judgment but also wanting people to turn back. Yeah.
No, and I'm sympathizing both of them and with God's anger here, because, we like to think, when we say anger, it's just like us. It's some affect. It's a sudden loss of control with some kind of emotion. When really a better way to understand it is that God's having this passion to turn things right in this way, and so as the Israelites rebel against Him, it's not good enough just to make them stop rebelling. That they have to turn it right. They have to turn it around again, and so that requires lots of pressure. So, I hope that these people turn out. I hope what's best for them is if they completely failed and they completely metaphorically crashed into a wall that stopped everything they were doing, and that would probably help them. So, hope that happens.
Just as a side point, we're kind of touching on one of the sort of interesting, controversial attributes of God that people have argued about historically. It's not a debate I know an awful lot about, but it's the impassibility of God, which is a doctrine that says that God doesn't experience sort of pain or pleasure. And I think it basically comes down to the idea that God doesn't change. I think that's the root of the idea that God is a constant. You take the idea that God is unchanging and push it to the nth degree, and you say, yeah, as we as temporal beings experience kind of flashing hot and cold, and our emotions come and go, whereas God is just this kind of solid, dependable being. I don't know what I think. I don't know whether I agree with this or not. Maybe one day somebody will convince me.
Yeah, if you get
a bit of an obscure debate, I think.
If you get classical theists on here one day, or Renaissance, they're gonna screw you up.
I'd love to hear somebody talk about it who's really looked into it. I don't know what the classical teaching of I don't know what the Orthodox or the Roman Catholic line on this are. I think the Catholic position agrees with impassibility. Great. Does anybody have any other comments on anything from the chapter?
Well,
If not, I'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Just the first verse made me think of well, actually, it's the darkness and light verse. It was just making me think about how as a catechumen you actually learn about the nature of sin and evil. It's not necessarily evil exists as it's like some thing that you can actually feel tangibly, but really it's the absence of being. It's sin is a privation of your being. So I like all these metaphors that are spritzed out throughout the Bible, where it's like it's talking about warmth or cold, or light shining out darkness. Darkness isn't really a thing in the same way that lightness is. It's just an absence of the light, and so the light can shine out onto it, and that's kind of emblematic of that nature of evil as opposed to good. So I always enjoyed that.
Great. Last calls on Isaiah 9. So I haven't put anything in the description. I will make sure I add to the description after we've wrapped up here. I'll stick links for you guys and links to the Reddit and the Discord. Join us in a week for another Christmassy passage. I think the plan is Luke 2 in a week and Luke 4 in 2 weeks. Thanks very much, you two, for joining me. Night Cringe Walker and 24th Reaction. Do check out those guys' channels.
Thank you.
And I'll see you everyone in a week.
See ya.